the cerebellum. When you open up inside this part inside called the diencephalon. And lastly, the brainstem right here. So cerebrum, cerebellum, diencephalon, and the brainstem. And that's the order I'll go over for you. So the cerebrum is all this outer part that we normally think of when we hear the word brain. It's some terminology to know before we go through the cerebrum is a fissure, like the ones you see right here. Those are grooves in the brain, so grooves we call fissures. Or the other word, like this one right here, is going to be called a sulcus. Right? Sulci plural. So fissure or sulcus. And then a gyrus would basically be an actual part of the brain. So between these sulci, like this right here is a gyrus. Make sense? And then gyri would be plural. So the actual structures, there's a longitudinal fissure separates the two halves of the cerebrum. A transverse fissure separates the cerebrum from cerebellum. A lateral sulcus separates the temporal lobe from the rest of the brain. And lastly, there's the central sulcus that's right here. And that's kind of like a key landmark in the brain. I'll mention one in a second. So there's 4 lobes of the brain corresponding to the 4 cranial bones. So this one is called frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and temporal lobe, right? So the frontal and parietal are separated by this central sulcus. And that's my key landmark because it makes naming all the other things on the brain easier once you identify the central sulcus. What I like to look for is, because I know it just looks like a mess of brain, what to look for is, do you see right before it is called the precentral gyrus? This is a gyrus, so precentral gyrus. And right after the central sulcus is the postcentral gyrus. And notice the direction they're running. It's basically like 2 vertical bands like that. And if you use your imagination a little bit, it turns out the gyri of the frontal and parietal lobe, other than these 2, they are running horizontally. So you have the superior, middle, and inferior frontal gyri. And some over here, the superior and inferior parietal lobule and the angular gyrus. Don't worry about those. It's just so you can kind of see light. They're running this way, and then these are running that way. Do you see what I'm talking about? So even if you see a completely ambiguous brain you've never seen before, it should be no big deal. Do you see the central sulcus? Right here? Exactly. So this is our strange brain model where it has the central sulcus way in the back. So you have pre- and post-central gyri, right? And this one has a huge frontal lobe. So notice this is kind of like the arteries of the heart where every model looks different, but that should be no problem now because you can easily identify the central sulcus.
How do you know if it's clear or
well, I saw this right here is the olfactory bulb, so I know this side's anterior. I'll talk about that in a second. Oh yeah, well they're all pretty much horizontal except for, and horizontal from looking from a lateral view. So they're like that, and then the pre and post central they're running up and down like that. Right, and then central sulcus. And that is it on the outside. Now there's some structures that you need to know on the inside of the brain. So on the inside of the cerebrum, this is the medial side. Notice the cerebrum doesn't go all the way across. Like if you saw a brain in real life, like it doesn't go across right there. It really is open like this model. And oh, actually dura mater is in between the two. So it doesn't go all the way across until we get to this structure, which we'll talk about. This does go all the way across to the other side, but the cerebrum doesn't. Okay. So there's structures on this side. Right here, what was this called? We talked about it. Oh yeah, this is the cerebellum. Then between the cerebellum and cerebrum is the
transverse
fissure. Very nice. Now this is called the lingual gyrus. I like to think it kind of looks like a tongue sticking out. Not really, but lingual gyrus. Next one's right here. It's called calcarine sulcus. Calcarine sulcus, right here. This right here is called the cuneus. And before it is precuneus. And there's separated by parieto-occipital sulcus. So if the central sulcus divides the frontal and parietal lobes, then we have a parieto-occipital sulcus separates the parietal from occipital lobes. And notice you can only see this one on the medial side. You can't see it up here. So parieto-occipital sulcus, precuneus is this part. And then the paracentral lobule. You can see kind of a box outlined right there. That's the paracentral lobule. And next one right here, I like to think it's kind of curved like an old school phone, like singular, so this is the Simulaid Gyrus. Worst mnemonic so far, probably. So that's Simulaid Gyrus, right there. And then continuing onwards. So Simulaid Gyrus, and hey, that's it with the cerebrum. So let's very quickly go through this. What is this called right here?
Cerebellum.
Transverse fissure, what is this?
Lingual.
Yep, how about this? Oh, yeah, this. Calcarean sulcus, and how about this? Yeah, cuneus. How about this right here? This one?
Precuneus.
Yeah, exactly. Parieto-occipital sulcus, and then what do we call this? Precuneus. And then this right here?
Cingulate.
Cingulate gyrus, and then this right here? There you go, paracentral lobule. And then that is it with the cerebrum. So any questions on that?
All I think of is Hannibal. Have you seen Hannibal?
Yeah, it's all of this right here.
Yeah,
Right here.
he's
And
cooking.
notice the central sulcus is not defined right
The guy's
here.
in the
It's, the
wheelchair.
central sulcus is right
He's
here.
cooking his brain.
Do you see that?
He's cooking
That's
his
the central
brain.
sulcus, right?
Remember.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's this one right here. It's not what defines the paracentral lobule, that's this, all that right there. It's within the paracentral lobule, do you see?